I am not someone's debt repayment." The words came out sharp, controlled, even as Amara Johnson's heart threatened to shatter her ribs. Across the antique Florentine desk, Vincent Romano, the man who held entire governments in his palm, finally raised his gaze. Those eyes were glacial, calculating, ancient with the weight of bloodlines and betrayals. "Your father forged your signature 3 months ago, Dr. Johnson," he said, each syllable wrapped in silk and menace, his Italian accent turning her professional title into something almost mocking. $20 million. That's what Marcus Johnson decided your name was worth. And you. He leaned forward, diamond cufflinks catching the low light of the palazzo study. Are the collateral that makes it real. Amara's fingers pressed against the leather armrest of the chair they'd forced her into, her mind racing through escape routes, legal precedents, anything to anchor her against this surreal nightmare. She sat in the heart of the Palazzo Romano, somewhere in the hills outside Rome, surrounded by men whose tailored suits concealed weapons and whose silence concealed violence. Oil paintings worth millions watched from the walls, witnesses to her captivity. "Then you've made a poor investment," she said, forcing her voice steady, academic, the tone she used when dismantling flawed historical arguments. "Because I don't belong to anyone." Vincent's expression didn't change. No smile. No anger. Just the cold assessment of a predator deciding whether prey would run or fight. "You have 72 hours to produce $20 million, Dr. Johnson." His pause was deliberate, surgical. "Or produce yourself. As my wife." The room tilted. Behind her, she heard the subtle shift of fabric, guards repositioning, exit sealing. "Before we continue," Vincent added, rising to his full height, "I suggest you understand something clearly. In my world, debts are always collected. The only question is what currency you choose to pay in." Before we dive deeper into Amara's impossible choice, take a moment to subscribe, like, and share. Settle in, and let's go somewhere you've never been before. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel Parco dei Principi buzzed with the careful energy of academic ambition. Amara adjusted her presentation notes for the third time, her fingers trembling slightly, not from nerves about her keynote on Byzantine military logistics, but from the 2 text messages her father had sent that morning. "Need to talk. Urgent." Then, an hour later, "I'm sorry, baby girl." She'd ignored both. Now, standing near the ornate gilded mirrors that lined the conference hall, she watched herself smooth down the emerald silk of her blouse, practicing the confident posture that had carried her through a dozen presentations before. Dr. Amara Johnson, 32, the youngest full professor in her department, specialist in military strategy and cultural preservation. She'd worked too hard to let her father's perpetual chaos bleed into this moment. "Dr. Johnson?" The voice came from behind her, clipped Italian wrong. She turned to find 2 men in black suits, their builds suggesting violence long before their words could. The taller one held up a leather portfolio, her name embossed in gold across the front. "You need to come with us. Now. I'm giving a presentation in 20 minutes. Your presentation is cancelled." The second man moved closer, his hand hovering near his jacket. "Not a threat. A promise. Mr. Romano requires your immediate presence." The name dropped like a stone through water. Romano. Everyone in Rome knew that name, even academics who tried to stay above the underworld's reach. Amara's mind raced through possibilities, searching for connections, finding none. "I don't know anyone named." "Your father does." The world narrowed to those 3 words. They escorted her through service corridors she hadn't known existed, past hotel staff who looked away with practiced efficiency. In the back of a black Mercedes that smelled of leather and expensive cologne, she finally opened the portfolio they'd handed her. Inside, a loan agreement. $20 million. Her signature, except it wasn't. She'd spent years studying historical documents, authenticating manuscripts, identifying forgeries. Her father had been decent, she'd give him that. The flourish on the J was nearly perfect. Nearly. But the date was wrong. 3 months ago, she'd been in Cairo, presenting at a symposium. She had custom stamps, conference badges, dozens of witnesses. "This is fraud," she said, her voice hollow. The driver met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Your father acquired certain artifacts on Mr. Romano's behalf. Late Roman imperial treasures, authenticated through channels that required discretion. The deal went bad. The artifacts were seized. The money vanished. And your signature guaranteed his debt." Her father, Marcus Johnson, the charming art dealer with too many connections and too few scruples. She'd distanced herself years ago, built her own reputation on legitimate scholarship while he danced along the edges of legality. Now his edges had finally collapsed inward. "Where is he?" she asked. "Somewhere safe. For now." The driver's tone made it clear exactly how conditional that safety was. "Mr. Romano prefers to collect from those who can actually pay." The palazzo appeared on the horizon, ancient and inevitable, and Amara understood with perfect, terrible clarity. Her father had sold her to save himself. And Vincent Romano had already decided she was his. Amara spent the first night locked in a guest wing that felt more like a museum than a prison. Venetian glass chandeliers, frescoed ceilings depicting mythological scenes of conquest, furniture that belonged behind velvet ropes. She hadn't slept. Instead, she'd done what she always did when the world stopped making sense. She'd strategized. By morning, she had her terms. Vincent looked up when she entered his office unannounced, his expression shifting from surprise to something darker. Curiosity, perhaps, or the pleasure a chess player feels when an opponent finally makes an interesting move. He'd been reading financial reports, whiskey already poured despite the early hour. His shirt sleeves rolled to reveal forearms marked with scars that told stories she didn't want to know. "I accept," Amara said, closing the heavy door behind her. No preamble. No ceremony. He set down his glass with deliberate care. "You've had a change of heart. I've had a reality check." She moved to stand before his desk, refusing the chair, refusing to be lower than him. "I can't produce $20 million. I can't run, you've made that clear. And I won't let my father's stupidity destroy what's left of my family." She paused, letting him see the calculation in her eyes. "So yes, I'll marry you. How practical." His tone suggested he'd expected tears, pleading, perhaps seduction. Her cold pragmatism seemed to intrigue him more. "But I have conditions." Now he did smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You're in no position to negotiate, Dr. Johnson. Then you're in no position to have a wife who cooperates." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. Notes she'd written in the dark hours, refined until every word was a weapon. "My sister, Jasmine. She's 19, sophomore at Columbia. She doesn't know about any of this, and she never will. You will provide full security for her, discreet, professional, no contact. If anything happens to her, if she's so much as inconvenienced by your world, this marriage becomes a very public legal battle you don't want." Vincent's jaw tightened. "You're threatening me. I'm establishing boundaries." She didn't blink. "Second condition. Unrestricted access to the Palazzo Romano's historical archives. I saw the library wing last night. You have manuscripts in there that museums would kill for. If I'm going to be imprisoned in this place, I'm going to work." "Work." He repeated the word like it was foreign. "I'm a historian, Mr. Romano. You're taking away my career, my freedom, my future. The least you can do is give me my field." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, the only emotion she'd allow him to see. "I need something that's mine." The silence stretched between them, heavy with calculation. Vincent rose, circling the desk until he stood close enough that she could smell cedar and danger. He was taller than she'd registered yesterday, built like violence wrapped in Armani. "Your sister will have a full security detail by tonight," he said finally. "Former carabinieri, invisible unless needed. And the archives are yours, every document, every manuscript, every secret this palazzo holds." He lifted her chin with one finger, forcing her to meet his gaze. "But understand something, Dr. Johnson. You just negotiated like someone who expects to survive this. That means you're already thinking past tomorrow, which means you're dangerous." His thumb traced her jawline, possessive and appraising. "Good," he whispered. "I prefer my wives dangerous." The wedding was a mockery dressed in Venetian lace. 3 days after Amara signed her name, her real signature this time, she found herself installed in the east wing of the palazzo, surrounded by beauty that felt like a threat. Her rooms were exquisite. Vaulted ceilings painted with Renaissance angels, a private terrace overlooking cypress groves that stretched toward the distant shimmer of Rome. A gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. Vincent appeared on her threshold that first night, still wearing his wedding suit, a bottle of Brunello in hand. His eyes swept over her. The silk robe she'd found laid across her bed, her hair still pinned from the ceremony, her expression carved from marble. "I thought we might discuss arrangements," he said, his voice low with implication. Amara stepped back, one hand on the door. "We discussed arrangements in your office, Mr. Romano. My sister's protection. The archives. Nothing more was negotiated. You're my wife. I'm your debtor's daughter." She let the words hang between them, sharp as broken glass. "You bought my signature, not my body. If you wanted a woman who'd warm your bed, you should have specified that in the terms." Something flickered in his gaze. Anger, perhaps, or that unsettling curiosity she'd seen before. For a moment, she thought he might push past her, might remind her exactly how much power he held in this house of stone and secrets. Instead, he laughed, soft and dangerous. "Sleep well, Dr. Johnson." He turned, and she closed the door before he could see her hands shaking. By the second week, Amara had mapped the archive's geography. 3 floors of manuscripts, ledgers, correspondence dating back 4 centuries. The Romano family had kept meticulous records of their empire, legitimate and otherwise, and they'd stored it all here, behind oak doors and iron locks to which she now held the keys. She worked from dawn until exhaustion claimed her, cataloging documents with the same precision she'd once applied to Byzantine military records. But now her scholarship had a different purpose. Every transaction, every name, every alliance documented in faded ink became a potential weapon. She photographed pages with the phone they'd allowed her to keep, encrypted the files, and stored them in places Vincent's men would never think to look. The Romano family had enemies. That much was clear from the correspondence alone. Vendettas stretching across generations, blood debts unpaid, territory disputes simmering beneath the surface of their polished legitimacy. Somewhere in these papers lay the fractures in Vincent's armor, and Amara intended to find every single one. At night, she dreamed of escape routes drawn in archival ink, of her sister's voice on the phone, bright, oblivious, safe. She dreamed of her father's hands signing her name, selling her future for his survival. She woke each morning with the same thought crystallizing behind her eyes. Vincent Romano had made a critical error. He'd given a historian access to his family's history. Now she would use it to destroy him. The summons came 3 weeks into her captivity, delivered by a guard whose face she'd learned to recognize, but whose name she'd never been offered. Vincent wanted her in his office. Not a request. She found him standing before a wall of windows, Rome sprawling golden beneath the afternoon sun. On his desk sat a stack of leather-bound ledgers and a single folder marked with the Romano family crest. "You've been thorough in the archives," he said without turning. "My staff tells me you've cataloged more in 3 weeks than the last curator managed in a year. I'm motivated." He turned then, something almost resembling respect in his expression. "I have a project for you. Something that requires your particular expertise in authentication and documentation." He gestured to the folder. "The Romano family has extensive legal holdings, property acquisitions, business licenses, corporate registrations spanning 6 decades. I need them organized, verified, cross-referenced. A complete audit of our legitimate operations." Amara kept her face neutral even as her pulse quickened. "You want a historian to do your legal filing? I want someone intelligent and discreet who has no connections to our lawyers, our accountants, or our enemies." His gaze sharpened. "Consider it a test, Dr. Johnson. Prove yourself useful, and perhaps your cage grows larger." She took the folder. The documents consumed her days, but not in the way Vincent intended. Yes, she cataloged his property deeds and corporate charters, his shell companies registered in Milan, and his holding firms scattered across Switzerland. She mapped the intricate architecture of Romano legitimacy, the restaurants and hotels, the art galleries and import businesses that laundered darker money into respectable streams. But she also studied. Late at night, with the palazzo silent around her, Amara dove into Italian business law with the same ferocity she'd once applied to Byzantine military treatises. She learned about beneficial ownership registries and anti-money laundering directives, about the gaps between EU regulations and Swiss banking discretion. She traced the legal pathways through which criminal enterprises had transformed themselves into legitimate dynasties. The Medicis, the Rothschilds, the families whose bloody origins had been polished into heritage. A pattern emerged. The Romanos were halfway there already. Vincent's grandfather had begun the transition decades ago, acquiring legitimate businesses, cultivating political connections, sending sons to universities instead of street corners. But the transformation remained incomplete. Too many assets still flowed through shadows. Too many names appeared in registers that prosecutors could subpoena. Amara began making notes in a cipher of her own design, part ancient Greek, part academic shorthand, entirely illegible to anyone but herself. She documented every vulnerability, every exposure, every thread that could unravel the Romano Empire if pulled by the right hands. Or the right wife. The irony wasn't lost on her. Vincent had handed her the blueprint to his kingdom, expecting obedience. Instead, she was learning exactly how to rebuild it, or burn it down. She hadn't yet decided which. They assumed she didn't understand. It was a reasonable assumption. Amara had cultivated it carefully. The American academic, fluent in dead languages, but surely deaf to the rapid-fire Calabrian dialect that Vincent's men slipped into when they thought themselves unobserved. She kept her eyes on manuscripts, her posture submissive, her presence so unremarkable that they forgot she existed. But Amara had spent 3 summers in Naples researching medieval trade routes. She'd argued with archivists in Roman slang and haggled with document dealers in dialects that hadn't changed since the Bourbon kings. Italian wasn't just a language she spoke. It was a weapon she'd sharpened long before Vincent Romano learned her name. The conversation happened in the courtyard beneath her archive window. 2 men smoking, their voices carrying on the still morning air. She recognized one. Enzo Ferrante, the capo who controlled Romano operations throughout Calabria. The other was younger, nervous, his words tumbling over each other like stones down a hillside. The 'Ndrangheta won't wait forever. Ferrante's been promising them access to the northern ports for months. Keep your voice down. Enzo's tone cut sharp. The old man doesn't need to know about preliminary negotiations. Once the deal is done, Romano will see the profit and forget the process. And if he doesn't? Enzo laughed, low and ugly. Then we'll have already moved enough product to retire somewhere the family can't reach. Amara didn't move. Didn't breathe. She let their words sink into her memory with the same precision she applied to authenticating centuries-old manuscripts, each syllable catalogued and cross-referenced. When they finally crushed their cigarettes and disappeared into the palazzo's labyrinth, she waited a full hour before descending. She found Vincent in the library that evening, alone for once, a chessboard set before him as if he were playing against ghosts. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering before his mask settled back into place. Dr. Johnson. Lost your way to the archives. Enzo Ferrante is negotiating unauthorized access to your northern shipping routes with the 'Ndrangheta. She delivered the information like a lecture citation, flat, factual, devastating. He's been conducting parallel deals for months. His exit strategy is already funded. The silence that followed was absolute. Vincent's hand hovered over a chess piece, frozen mid-move. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to something cold enough to burn. How do you know this? Your men assume the American historian doesn't speak Italian. She held his gaze without flinching. They assume wrong about many things. Vincent set down the piece, a knight, she noticed, positioned for attack. He studied her as if seeing her for the first time, his expression cycling through something she couldn't quite name. Fury, certainly. But beneath it, reluctant and dangerous, respect. It seems, he said slowly, that I've underestimated my investment. Most men do. Amara turned toward the door, then paused. You're welcome, Mr. Romano. She left him staring at the board, the game irrevocably changed. The first trip beyond the palazzo walls should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like a leash lengthening. Vincent had approved her request to visit the Vatican archives. A professional courtesy, he'd called it, though the 4 armed escorts suggested otherwise. Amara climbed into the black sedan with her research notes pressed against her chest, watching Rome unfold through bulletproof glass like a city she'd once known in another life. They never reached the Vatican. The ambush came on a narrow street in Trastevere, 2 motorcycles boxing the sedan against a delivery truck that had stopped too conveniently. Amara's door was wrenched open before the guards could react, rough hands dragging her onto cobblestones that scraped her palms raw. She heard shouting, gunfire, the wet sound of fists meeting flesh, and then a voice in her ear, breath hot with tobacco and menace. Tell Romano that Massimo Ferrante sends his regards. The man's grip bruised her arm as he forced her to look at him. Young, cruel, bearing Enzo's surname like a threat. Tell him the 'Ndrangheta doesn't forget insults. And tell him his pretty professor bleeds just like anyone else. The knife appeared from nowhere, tracing a line across her collarbone, shallow, surgical, designed to scar rather than kill. Amara didn't scream. She locked her jaw and stared into his eyes with the same cold fury she'd once reserved for academics who questioned her credentials. Then Vincent arrived. She hadn't seen him leave the second car. One moment Massimo's nephew was grinning down at her. The next, he was on the ground, Vincent's knee crushing his throat, a pistol pressed to his temple. The street had gone silent except for the groans of fallen men and the distant wail of sirens someone had summoned too late. "You touched what's mine." Vincent's voice was barely human, low, guttural, stripped of every civilized pretense. "You bled what's mine." The young man choked out something that might have been a plea. Vincent didn't acknowledge it. Instead, he looked at Amara, still on the ground, blood seeping through her blouse, refusing to show weakness, and something terrible moved behind his eyes. The gunshot was deafening. Amara flinched, but she didn't look away. She watched Vincent rise, watched him step over the body without a downward glance, watched him extend his hand to her as if offering assistance at a formal dinner. "Can you walk?" She took his hand. Her legs held. "Yes." He guided her to the car, his palm warm against the small of her back, his men already erasing evidence from the street behind them. In the sedan's dark interior, he produced a handkerchief, silk monogrammed, and pressed it gently to her wound. "Massimo will answer for this," he said quietly. "His entire organization will answer." Amara met his gaze, seeing the monster clearly now, understanding the precise nature of his protection. She was property, valuable, defended with the same ferocity he'd show for any prized possession. It should have horrified her. Instead, she filed it away, another weapon, another weakness, another thread to pull when the time came. The wound on her collarbone healed into a thin white line, a permanent reminder etched into her skin. Amara traced it absently each morning, letting the memory of cobblestones and gunfire sharpen her focus. Massimo Ferrante had meant to send a message. Instead, he'd given her a gift, access to Vincent's war council, where strategy mattered more than gender or circumstance. She spent 2 weeks buried in the legal documents Vincent had assigned her, cross-referencing them against the archived correspondence she'd already catalogued. The pattern emerged like a mosaic assembling itself from scattered tiles. Enzo Ferrante's signature appeared on property transfers that predated his authority. Shell companies registered in his wife's maiden name funneled money toward Calabrian accounts that never appeared in Romano ledgers. The betrayal wasn't impulsive. It was architectural, years in the making, designed to hollow out Vincent's southern operations from within. And every thread led back to Massimo. She requested an audience on a Thursday evening, finding Vincent alone in the study where she'd first been given her ultimatum. The room felt different now, still dangerous, still suffocating with power, but familiar in ways that unsettled her. He looked up from documents of his own, his expression guarded but curious. "The scar is healing well," he observed. "I'm not here about the scar." Amara spread her research across his desk, charts, timelines, corporate genealogies rendered in her precise hand. Enzo Ferrante has been building a parallel infrastructure for at least 4 years. Property, shipping access, political contacts in Reggio Calabria, all positioned to transfer seamlessly to 'Ndrangheta control. Massimo isn't just an ally. He's the buyer. Vincent studied the documents in silence, his jaw tightening with each page. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously soft. "You're certain? I've authenticated documents that survived the fall of Constantinople, Mr. Romano. I know how to read a paper trail." She pulled forward the final page, her proposal. "Killing Enzo creates a power vacuum that Massimo will exploit. You need a structural solution, not a violent one." His eyes lifted to hers, sharp with skepticism. "You're suggesting I show mercy." "I'm suggesting you think like the Medici instead of the Borgias." Amara held his gaze without wavering. "Seize Enzo's assets through the legal entities you already control. Restructure the Calabrian operations under direct family oversight. Your cousin Marco has the loyalty and the bloodline. File the property transfers with authorities yourself, framing Enzo as a rogue operator. You eliminate the threat, legitimize your southern holdings, and give Massimo nothing to purchase." She watched Vincent process the strategy, watched him weigh violence against cunning, tradition against evolution. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. "The Medici," he finally said, something almost amused in his tone, "were patrons of historians. They were also ruthless pragmatists who built an empire that outlasted their enemies by centuries." Amara gathered her papers, the negotiation complete. "I'll leave the implementation to you." She was nearly to the door when his voice caught her. Amara. Her name, not doctor, not Johnson. She turned. You may have just saved my organization. His expression remained unreadable, but something had shifted beneath the surface. I won't forget that. She inclined her head and left him to his war. The call came at 3 a.m. Vincent's voice on the intercom beside her bed, clipped and urgent. Get dressed. Now. Amara didn't ask questions. She'd learned to read the rhythms of the palazzo over the past weeks, the subtle shifts in guard rotations and hushed conversations that signaled approaching storms. Tonight, the corridors hummed with tension she could taste. Vincent met her in the East Wing hallway, his suit jacket discarded, a holster visible against his ribs. Behind him, 2 guards carried cases she didn't recognize. Massimo moved faster than anticipated. His men crossed into our territory an hour ago. 3 of our safe houses are already compromised. The restructuring takes time we no longer have. He placed a hand on her elbow, guiding her toward a section of the palazzo she'd never been permitted to enter. Enzo warned him. The moment Marco arrived in Calabria, Massimo knew his window was closing. They descended a staircase hidden behind a tapestry depicting the sack of Rome, the air growing cooler with each step. The walls shifted from Renaissance plaster to medieval stone, then to something older, massive blocks fitted without mortar, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries. Amara's historian's heart recognized the construction immediately. Roman foundations, she breathed. 1st century. The palazzo was built on the bones of a senator's villa. Vincent pressed his palm against a stone that looked no different from its neighbors. Something clicked, ancient mechanisms groaning to life, and a door swung inward. My grandfather called this the keep. Every Romano heir learns its location on their 20th birthday. The chamber beyond stole her breath. It was a war room, but one that spanned millennia. Maps covered the walls, hand-drawn charts of medieval trade routes alongside satellite imagery of modern shipping lanes. Display cases held weapons from every era, Roman gladii, Renaissance rapiers, modern firearms arranged with museum precision. And at the center, on a table carved from a single block of travertine, lay a collection of documents bound in leather so old it had turned nearly black. The blueprints, Vincent said, watching her face. Every tunnel, every hidden passage, every escape route built into this structure over 2,000 years. My family's greatest secret. Amara approached the table as if it were an altar. Her fingers hovered over the leather bindings, recognizing vellum beneath, ink formulations that predated the printing press. You're showing me this. Why? Vincent moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him despite the chamber's chill. Because Massimo's men will breach the outer defenses within hours. Because my soldiers can hold them, but only if someone understands this building well enough to use it as a weapon. His gaze met hers, stripped of pretense for the first time since she'd known him. And because you've proven yourself more valuable than anyone I've ever underestimated. He pressed the ancient blueprints into her hands, trust made tangible, heavy with centuries of secrets. Study them, he said. We have until dawn. Amara looked down at the documents, feeling the weight of history and survival pressing against her palms. Somewhere above, an empire trembled. She began to read. Dawn came with gunfire. Amara heard the first shots from the keep, muffled by centuries of stone, but unmistakable. She'd spent the remaining hours committing the blueprints to memory. Every passage, every false wall, every escape route carved by paranoid ancestors who understood that survival meant preparation. Now she stood beside Vincent at a communications array that looked absurdly modern against the Roman walls. Listening to his lieutenants report positions she could visualize with perfect clarity. They've breached the eastern courtyard. Marco's voice crackled through the speaker. We're falling back to the gallery wing. No. Amara stepped forward before Vincent could respond. The gallery wing funnels into a single corridor. They'll be slaughtered. She traced a path on the blueprint spread before them. There's a servant's passage behind the fresco of St. Michael, 16th century edition, designed for exactly this scenario. It connects to the old granary, which has reinforced positions overlooking the courtyard. Vincent studied the route, then keyed the radio. Marco, behind the angel. You'll find a door. Silence. Then, Madonna. There's a tunnel here. How did? Move. Now. The battle unfolded in fragments, radio reports, distant explosions, the occasional tremor of something structural giving way. Amara became the palazzo's memory, guiding Vincent's forces through passages that hadn't been used in generations. She directed flanking maneuvers through medieval wine cellars and positioned snipers in bell towers that predated the Reformation. The building itself became a weapon, and she was its voice. The moment came without warning. A breach in the keep's outer chamber. 4 of Massimo's men pouring through a doorway that should have been impenetrable. Vincent moved to intercept, but Amara saw what he couldn't. The load-bearing weakness in the archway above, documented in a margin note from 1743. Vincent down. She threw herself against him as she triggered the ancient mechanism she'd identified hours before. The archway collapsed with a roar of dust and stone, burying the intruders beneath rubble that had waited 3 centuries for this purpose. They lay tangled together in the aftermath, his body covering hers, both gasping in the sudden silence. When the dust settled, Vincent lifted himself just enough to look at her. Really look, as if seeing someone entirely new. "You saved my life. I saved the organization." But her voice shook, and they both knew the distinction had blurred beyond recognition. The siege ended at noon. Massimo's forces, leaderless after a surgical strike Amara had helped coordinate, scattered into the hills where Romano allies waited to collect them. The palazzo stood scarred but unbroken, its secrets intact. That evening, Vincent found her in the keep, carefully preserving the blueprints she'd used to orchestrate victory. He stood in the doorway, watching her work with an expression she'd never seen before, something beyond respect, beyond desire. "I offered you a cage," he said quietly. "You turned it into a throne." Amara set down her tools and faced him fully. "I want legitimacy. Real power. A seat at every table where decisions are made. You want to rebuild this family from the inside out. I want to make it unconquerable." She extended her hand, not in supplication, but in partnership. "Do we have a deal, Mr. Romano?" Vincent took her hand, raised it to his lips, and smiled like a man who'd finally met his equal. "Welcome to the dynasty, Dr. Johnson."